or wherever you are. Welcome to 100 plus on the call and probably another 100 plus watching the recording. Welcome to our first in a series of webinars here at the beginning of 2018, all about how to raise the value of your work, and specifically today, how to turn an excited prospect, of whom I hope you have many, into actual real paying clients. Special welcome to some very familiar faces on the call for whom this next slide will not really be necessary. The photograph might be, as I've known some of you for 10 years or longer, or even more, when the hair was a different color. So there's the update. For anyone who's new, and there are quite a few new people on the call today, a few words of introduction. Most of my work is with the expertise-based professions, people who essentially are selling their expertise, their knowledge, their unique insights into specific marketplaces. Many are independents, but also I've just started a global program as of yesterday for a very large multinational organization where we're taking 3 different sales teams through a journey over the next 12 months. Nearly everyone, whatever size of company it is, want to improve the fee rates. They want to be able to charge premium prices for what they do. And probably one of the biggest difficulties, or one of the biggest areas of struggle right now, is with this culture of discounting, which is pretty much affecting every sector. Many, of course, want to be able to compete in crowded markets, so being more compelling with prospects is a close second. And finally, there's the human side, actually being able to keep energy high and keep our own sense of value high in a marketplace that's not always very easy. So these would be the top 3 struggles, I guess, that I've been supporting professionals with for so many years now, I no longer mention it. Our agenda for today is focusing very much on how we deal with that very last step in the customer journey when you've already invested all the time and the money and energy in actually reaching that prospect in the first place, how to avoid some of the classic pitfalls that unfortunately often cause a professional to fall at the last hurdle. And central to that is an approach based on being the client's partner and not being their servant. This is the shift, if you like, that all of today is about. And as part of that, we're going to look into 4 key tips that change the game, that just put the relationship onto a more firm footing, a more partnership footing, as implied in that slide. And there will be time as we go through for Q&A, and Claire will keep me posted on anything on the chat box, because being a guy, I can only watch one thing at a time, so I need some help. So if there are specific issues or questions you want to raise at any point, feel free to pop them through in the question box. From time to time, Claire will interrupt my monologue to actually cover some of those questions. At the very end, there'll be a few suggested action items for you. Whether you want to take that challenge or not is up to you, but by all means, stick around. We'll also share slides at the end of the session. So what's today about? Well, it is, as I've already alluded to, it's about being very real in this partnership approach. And that means we're building solutions with our clients and not just for them. That's not just semantics. The whole idea of going away to do things for a client, I believe, is fundamentally mistaken in our professions. Whether we're coaches, whether we're designers, whether we are trainers, whether we are IT professionals, going off to do things for people is less powerful than doing things with people. So therefore, we want to bring this equality, this peer-to-peer relationship, into the relationship from the very beginning. And that's when our natural desire to be of service our natural desire to solve people's problems can sometimes trip us up if we're not careful. And the overall process of value-centered selling, which is what the VCO stands for on the bottom of your screen, value-centered organization, the whole approach of being value-centered is there to rescue us from that. More about this in the next webinar on negotiation, but first step of the process is how we prepare. In other words, we go into meetings armed with insights about the client world. Secondly, we use our initial meetings to explore need, to actually find out what's going on for them, why is that important, right now, what kind of difference they're looking to make through involvement with us. Thirdly, we look at reframing that need. We look at already before we put forward any solution, before we even suggest an approach, we get the client thinking differently about their issues. This ability to get the client thinking differently is pretty fundamental, because if we can do so successfully, we have earned the right to be their trusted advisors. So we're then able to talk about options and budget, and we're then able to deal with any objections they might have while we're still in the room, hopefully. Naturally, particularly in some cultures, there will be a process of negotiation. This is normal. This is a standard buying signal in many cases. And finally, there's the last aspect of negotiating the agreement. And today we're looking at the later stages of this. We're looking at when you have a customer you've already discussed their needs, you have already added value in terms of getting them thinking differently. You are perhaps now talking about the options and maybe anticipating the objections. And this is the point at which sometimes we drop the ball. And we drop it not necessarily for bad reasons, but often for very good ones. This is the tragedy, if you like. More about that on the next webinar. This is part of a series. So the next one on February the 27th is about maximizing your fees. So we're going to take more time to look at each of the steps of that process on the 27th of February. The one after that is the human side, how you actually manage to maintain your focus and how you manage to maintain your energy during these times of uncertainty. And for many people, navigating uncertainty is a pretty hot topic in 2018. By the way, speaking of hot topics, thanks to all of you who have taken part in the research that has led up to this. I know that through LinkedIn, many of you have answered some of my messages around what the key topics are. And these were the key the winners, if you like, in terms of what people wanted to discuss in this series. And finally, in April, we're going to look at how you can delegate the prospecting by getting other people to share your story. Okay, let's come back to the problem. Any situation you're in right now, so I'm just off the call to somebody who is preparing for a meeting with quite a large Italian company next week. That Italian company has a greater choice of suppliers available to them than they've ever had before. And naturally, that great choice of suppliers does put pressure on price. Furthermore, that Italian company believe they know the market. Now, whether they do or whether they don't, they believe they do. So for that reason, in that way, there is a degree of customer sophistication that perhaps we've not had to deal with before. In dealing with that Italian company, my client will have to not only deal with a single decision maker, but he will have to deal with multiple decision makers. Co-directors, for example, possibly somebody from procurement, for example. So there is, many of us are cursed with this consensus decision making, that it's not just enough to meet one person, we have to meet several. And all of that tends to have a gravitational pull in the wrong direction on the sorts of prices and fees we're going to charge. The approach we're outlining today is to counter that gravitational pull, for you to be able to keep your fees higher in that context. Why does this partner-servant approach matter? Well, it's not just about the pricing. It's about the entire relationship you're going to have with the customer. Put simply, if you want a customer who's going to listen to you, who is going to be open to your approach, then you need to somehow be at partnership level with them. If you're at servant level, you get instructed. And for many of us who do what we do, we didn't just go into this profession in order to be instructed. We went into it in order to add value in the first place, not just to carry out instructions. Of course, it has a knock-on effect on pricing, for sure. It has a very definite effect on credibility. If servants are abundantly available, there's simply no urgency to buy them. So credibility also has a knock-on effect in terms of customer loyalty. If they find somebody even 5% cheaper than you next year, the chances are you get replaced if you're a servant. If, on the other hand, you are a trusted partner, they will think twice before having to bring on somebody else and bring them up the learning curve that you've been on. So all of this adds up to an awful lot of work that we have to do if we are condemned to be the servants of the customer. If I'm going a little bit quickly through these, by the way, first and foremost, I'll send the slides at the end, so don't worry about trying to write it all down. And secondly, my speed at this point is more about getting quickly to the solution rather than the problem. However, we do need to understand the problem. So what are some of the common pitfalls? Probably top of the list is the time one. Our eagerness is often our enemy. If we are in a hurry to make an offer too quickly, then that hurry may already pigeonhole us as servants. So coaching call with somebody yesterday, the customer came to them saying, can you send us a proposal for X by tomorrow? And one of the things that we had to deal with is how do we answer that question? Because if we just send a proposal by tomorrow, we're already in servant land. Bad idea. Quoting too quickly, particularly quoting numbers too quickly, without having first asked a few basic business, operational, and/or technical questions, depending on the field that you're in. Some of you might have to substitute financial or learning and development for the word technical. But the ability to ask some pretty basic business questions and some pretty basic operational questions, real customers will want to answer those questions. Discounting, one of the most dreaded words in the English language. If I had to spend the rest of my life campaigning against something, it would probably be discounting. At least campaigning against something in the business world. Excuse me. I hate discounting. Discounting diminishes value. Discounting leads to more discounting, because no matter how much you give them, they always want more. And if they don't want more this time, they'll want more next time. So trying to demonstrate value by discount is a losing game. So is spending too much time with customers who have no intention of buying. Now, this is a tricky one, because there's a certain amount of time we have to spend, but at what point do we draw the line? Today will hopefully help with that line drawing. And of course, the caveat we always have to remember is that the single biggest reason why proposals of all kinds fail is not because there's something wrong with them, or it's not because they were badly presented, or it's not because the approach is wrong, but actually that the person involved, that we crafted the approach for the wrong person. All too often, it's not what was in the proposal that's in the problem, it's who we were talking to when we did it. And perhaps finally, being very solution-focused people, it is the easiest thing in the world for us to be focused on opportunity, to be focused on the resolution of problems. Of course we are. Most of us on this call are probably pretty positive people. However, here's the caveat. It's actually quite important to highlight the risks that customers are running. While opportunity is compelling, risk is even more compelling. And therefore, perhaps and we cannot get that conversation at the point at which we've quoted numbers. So there's no point in quoting a number first and then exploring risk of alternative with the customer. We have to have explored the risks of approach before we quote numbers. Otherwise, it's just too late. Any comments, observations at this point, Claire, before I crack on and actually start looking at some of the solution stuff? Hey, I hear you. Can you hear me? Oh, I've lost you again. You're back. Yeah.
Out a bit, but so far so good.
All right. Well, interrupt me if necessary. Thanks, Claire. I'm going to, I think we've covered the pitfalls enough. I'm watching time. It's 12:16 in my clock. I'm pretty sure you came for solutions rather than problems. So I would rather sort of skip over the rest for here and get on to some of the tips. Number one, top of the list. Now, the devil's in the detail here, so let's please listen to the nuances of this rather than just the words on the slide. We often go into sales meetings as if they were interviews. In other words, they're going to do all the choosing. But actually, it's quite important that you let your prospective client know that you choose your clients as well. So, for example, you might say things like, in order to be sure we can work with you, can I just check where is this in your overall priorities? Maybe not the best question, but it's a way of ending the sentence. Or you might say, you might allude to a success story you've already had and highlight the fact that for that reason, you only work with certain types of clients or certain types of customers. Can I just ask you a few questions to make sure that I can work with you? You can use any form of words you like, actually. The key nuance here is to do so lightly and not to make a drama out of it. You can even do so quite humorously. It doesn't have to be heavy-handed. But I would suggest that at some point in any customer meeting, before coming to a quotation, is that you let them know as lightly and casually as possible that you choose the customers you work with. And if you're up for it, one of the key items of homework to take from this call is to craft that question that works for you and keep it as light as possible. The key here is not to make a drama out of it. There is a risk of that. In my coaching work, excuse me, a lot of time is spent briefing and debriefing for customer meetings. So you get quite close to, we role play, for example, what that meeting is going to be like, and we role play what it was like afterwards. So we begin to learn and understand as we go. And one of the pitfalls here is making a big deal out of this. It's very, very easy to go into a big long story about why we, our philosophy of life and why we only work with X, Y, Z. That's a mistake. That smacks of self-centeredness and self-preoccupation. That happens. So the key is to be able to do this, but with a light touch. So you're letting them know, but you're not making, you're not singing an entire sonnet about it. I see a message coming in from Charlotte. Bear with me a moment. Sorry, my screen is missing the edge of it. Claire, can you read it? Because I'm missing part of the phrase.
deal with clients who want to quote right away. So people that want to know off the bat, what can you tell them?
Yeah, two things, Charlotte, two suggestions. One would be, first and foremost, say, sure, I understand you want to get a quote ASAP. Can I just ask you a few questions that will help me to give you that information? That's the first part. And if necessary, or if possible, I should say, to do that via a telephone call or at least some form of interaction. I, for one, am absolutely, will spend no time batting emails over and back with somebody who's not willing to actually have a telephone conversation. What's the point? They're not real, as far as I can see. And the second question that helps is, what's driving the urgency? So we need a quote ASAP. Okay, why ASAP? What's the urgency here? Why is that? Because I'm trying to get to the reality behind the urgency. If the reality is they have a serious problem, that's one thing. If the reality is they just want to get another quote in so that they can agree someone else's work, then sorry, I don't have time to be cannon fodder for other people's beauty parades. Mixed metaphor, scrub that. But hope that helps, Charlotte. In all cases, I'm wary of people who want quotes ASAP. Sure, they may be real buyers. All too often, they're not. And we can waste an awful lot of evenings and weekends trying to be at their servants, in effect. Time check, 12:22. We need to crack on. Secondly, this has proved really valuable in one of the larger companies I worked with last year. So really suggest zoom in on this. We naturally tend to defend ourselves as supplier. It's the most natural, we're putting forward the best case for us as a supplier, for us as a coaching company or a training company or a technology company. Sure, and we believe in that. I suggest you transpose the language by focusing on choice of approach rather than choice of supplier. So why am I saying that? Well, by focusing on choice of approach, it psychologically takes them into working with you. So you might, well, I'll come to some examples in a moment. So let's understand the why first and foremost. So the first is psychological. It takes them into the working with you. Secondly, gives you that extra opportunity to uncover risk. Remember I said risk is more compelling than, pain is more compelling than gain. Risk is more compelling than opportunity. So you want to create as many opportunities as possible to uncover potential risks. You are the expert in delivering what you deliver. You have delivered it with other customers. That's the expertise they're buying. So what you want to do is highlight some of the risks that occurred elsewhere without breaking confidentiality, of course, and start to get them thinking, and in some cases start to educate them about some of the risks that they are running. Because there's two things that drives your value. One is the result of what you can deliver, but the second is how hard it is. And it's this one we need to focus on. If we're focusing on this one, but ignoring this, they'll just do it themselves. They will spend long enough talking to you to understand the approach, and then they'll do the work in-house. If, on the other hand, you show them the value is high, but you also show them that it's not easy, it's complicated, that there are risks they need to avoid, then that's a very compelling reason that drives your value. And thirdly, as part of all of the above, just your very willingness to take them through that conversation, you start behaving as their trusted expert, as their trusted partner. And obviously, we all want trusted partner status. Of course we do.
Sorry.
Claire. Yeah.
I was just going to say, we have a couple questions,
Okay.
which are good ones. Karen wanted to know, what are the two things that drive your value?
So the value of anything is the benefit that it delivers. But that benefit can be in two parts. So the benefits can be positive. Not sure what not sure which, it just says Karen, I'm not sure which Karen it is, but if you know, if you are in the field of let's say learning and development, then the value will be the result of that learning and development. But another part, an equally important part of that value, will be what will happen if they don't do it. So if they don't invest in this learning and development, what will happen? Will some of their key people leave? Well, maybe that will be why they hire you. So yes, there's the benefit of learning and development, but there's the consequences of not investing in learning and development. So the two things that drive our value are, if you want the formula, it's gain plus pain, or it's opportunity plus risk. It's the opportunity, it's the benefit that we deliver, plus and sometimes multiplied by the pain that happens if we, the pain avoided, or the pain averted, or risk averted as a result. Hope that helps, Karen.
And then one more from Matt regarding fee, or the conversation about fee. What should you say when a potential client suggests a success bonus? Should I offer a trade-off with the basic rate?
I am very wary of success bonuses, Matt. I mean, if they're pure bonuses, that's fine. There's two problems with bonuses. One is it can diminish the client's commitment to the project in some cases. Second problem is who's doing the measuring. If you have access to the basic information from which the measurements are done, then good. That's you know, then you can validate the numbers. But I'm totally averse to any form of purely success-based remuneration. I think unless you're really good at that and you've proven, unless you've got access to the basic data from which it's constructed, which you might have in some arenas like, you know, search engine optimization perhaps, or something where you have more access to the data than the client has, then fine. But unless you're in charge of the data, the risk is it diminishes the client's commitment to the project. I'd be wary about success bonuses. Remember all the time that jigsaw piece that we showed right on slide 1. We're looking for an equal commitment to the project. More on that though. I mean, the next webinar is entirely about negotiation and pricing, so we can go into that in a little bit more detail then. Back to today. The final reason for talking about choice of approach rather than choice of you as a supplier, it almost acts as a trial close without you having to close. If they buy your approach, they're almost certainly buying you. Of course, not certainly. It is almost certainly. But you know, if we were, you know, if you and they are going for option C on the table, whatever option C is, they have been writing down lots in the course of talking to you about this, then the chances are they've already bought you psychologically. So, time check, yes, need to move on. Third piece, very important, it's when we talk about money. It's already come up, actually. It's come up in the earlier question from Charlotte. Naturally, customers want to know how much it costs. Don't we all? You know, we've all been customers. We are customers. The first question on our minds is, how much is it? I'm here in Lisbon. I walked past a lovely piece of property a few days ago. I just wanted to know how much it was. That's fine when it's property. The property is not a project, though. Well, can be, but usually it's not. But in many cases, what customers are doing with you are projects. In other words, they contribute something, you contribute something, together we create a result. And therefore, we're not in the commodity business. Yeah, we're not catalog selling. I had a call with somebody this morning who basically said, you know, customers expect them to know the price. And we had a debate about, are you a catalog seller or not? If you're a catalog seller, I can't help you. You know, I don't know what the answer is. It's, you know, you throw stuff at a dartboard, let's hope it lands. In most cases, we're not. In most cases, we need to understand the need here. and we need to perhaps, when I say reframe, I mean add fresh perspective to the need here. And then as a result of that, we can talk about options, and we can talk about a budget guideline for these options. And then when we've had that conversations, i.e. steps 2, 3, 4 of the process described earlier, then and only then are we in a position to talk about how much it might be. And to begin with, that will almost certainly be a guideline, a budget guideline. It won't actually yet be a fee quote until we have at least some agreement that we are on the same budget guideline. I cannot emphasize enough how much benefit having a budget guideline conversation brings, as long as you do it before doing a proposal. It allows you to bring that conversation into the choice of approach, as already discussed. So this is tip 2 and 3 together. It allows you to talk openly and frankly about what their what your competitors have quoted them. Perfectly good reason to do so. Remember, you've already reframed their needs, therefore you've won the right to be a trusted advisor. So you're probably on the same side of the table by now, psychologically. At least that's where we're aiming to be. And frankly, if we're not, you can start to wrap up your files and papers and go, look, I'm not sure I should be involved in this. Remember, I said at the beginning, I only get involved with projects where at least the customers are willing to disclose some of the end game here. If we're not talking about the ultimate business results, I'm sorry, but I'm not just a translator. I'm not just an accountant. I'm not just a techie.
John, you may have just answered this, but Mike wants to know, how do you overcome clients' resistance to provide budget guideline?
Yeah, with difficulty, Mike, with difficulty. But nobody wants to name numbers first. It is, of course, a basic principle in negotiation. You try to get the other side to name a number first, but very often nobody wants to. So I will go through what other people are spending to achieve the same or similar results. I will start talking about the gold option, whatever that might be, whatever the best option is. And if they turn pale or faint or need artificial resuscitation at the end of that conversation, then obviously we talk about silver, and then we might talk about bronze, all the time highlighting the risk of underinvesting in the project. And then somewhere in that conversation, it's, where were you looking, what resources were you planning to commit to this project? And I'm looking for answers to that before I take the time to word process a detailed proposal, which may take several hours of work, and also may map out the approach that, let's face it, they might do themselves. So I hope that answers the question. We cannot compel them to name numbers. We can talk about what other people are spending and ask them to name, are they in the market for a Lada, or are they in the market for a Rolls Royce? I'm wary of that metaphor, but I just used it. Hope that helps.
John, we have a lot of questions coming through, and Kim, yes, this is all being recorded, everyone. So we will send the replay after the call via email. Ian asked, do you prefer to quote as fixed price or day rate? If the latter, how do you handle questions about discounting day rates for longer engagements?
This is an easy one for me to answer. Ian, I absolutely prefer fixed price for anything other than day rates. Time-based charging is the weakest possible charging. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about that in the next webinar, so I'm probably not going to take any more questions on pricing today, Claire, just because of time.
Okay. Sure.
But I will deal with this one. Of course, sometimes we have to. There's just no other way. I used to work in IT. There are some projects that are just unscopable. The best you can do is a day rate. I get that. But the problem with the day rate is it sets out to set a floor under your earnings, and actually it ends up setting a ceiling. Day rates, you know, when I've worked with clients over the years who have doubled and tripled their revenues, I assure you, most of the time they've departed from day rates in order to do so. They may have still got day rates for their own calculations, of course, but normally the most lucrative growth has been achieved by those who've had the courage to leave that. Working with a guy last week who is just at the beginning of that journey, and already he's beginning to see how he can lift his, you know, roughly 200k a year earnings to 300k in a very short period of time. Why? By getting away from day rates. By the way, I mentioned 200 to 300. It could well be that he's on 50 and he wants to get to 100. You know, the numbers here is not the point. The power of this is in the conversation, precisely in the sequence that's in front of you. The power of this lies in steps 2, 3, 4. You get really good at steps 2, 3, 4. It's very easy to do steps 5, 6, 7. Most of the work, most of the learning is about having the value conversation. If you can have that, many of us have doubled and tripled our day rates simply by having a more powerful conversation on the front end. So to answer the question, Ian, passionately against day rates. I know that at times we have to reluctantly accept them, but you know, I'd rather that was 20% rather than 80% of anyone's revenue.
And I just want to note, we have more questions, but if everybody, just in the interest of time, if you could just wait to them till the end, and I'll pass through a few of them, but we can't take all. Yeah.
Yeah. Claire, if we can just move the questions on pricing to the next webinar, because the next webinar is all about pricing and negotiation technique. So let's stick to the other aspects of the sales conversation.
Sure.
For today. We're on the third tip. That third tip is discuss budget guideline before doing a quotation, whatever it is, fixed price or day rate. Why? Gives you a reference point, as already alluded to, saves you wasting time, as already alluded to, and allows you to contextualize their investment in the context of risk and reward. So, you know, if we're about to save them a potential $500,000, why are we quibbling over $5,000? You know, it allows you to have that conversation. So what's the language here? Well, language is important. I would be careful. I know I've used the word budget guideline with you, but I'd be mindful that in different organizations, the word budget can mean very different things. So well, I prefer these days the word resources. You know, shall we turn our attention to the resources we need to deliver benefit, 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 and avoid the risk of risk, risk, risk. Remember, value is benefit plus risk. These days I prefer the word resources, and then I will ask them, you know, possibly even after just using the word resources, do you already have a budget guideline in mind? Would it be helpful if I shared with you what other companies have invested, obviously, watch client confidentiality, in order to achieve similar objectives? Or if you prefer, how about we define a budget guideline? And then we construct the approach accordingly. Because the approach, remember, we're campaigning for choice of approach rather than choice of supplier. So you can ask any question you like to help them define the right approach. More on that, obviously, next webinar. I want to give time to this last one. This is the one. This is low-hanging fruit here, folks. Most people are just not doing it. Believe it or not, the best thing you can possibly do for a real client, as opposed to a pretend client, is give them homework. In fact, it'll help you to define who will or who are the real clients versus those who are, as we used to call them, the tire kickers. The tire kickers coming from a time in the UK, at least, when people would be out on a Sunday visiting second-hand car showrooms, idly, you know, kicking the tires of various vehicles, going, how much is this one then? And most of the time having no intention whatever of buying a car, but it was just a way of passing a rainy Sunday afternoon. Well, it's a bit the same with the term tire kickers stands for those who are interested in everything but buying absolutely nothing. So tip here is give the client some homework. Those who do the homework are real. Why? Because here's the amazing paradox. I can't explain it. I can only outline it. Your credibility is best established by emphasizing the client's brackets essential contribution to the project rather than all the things you're going to do for them. So I just can't explain this. Maybe you can. But the more you emphasize what the client is going to have to do, the more you emphasize how essential that is. For example, the buy-in from senior management or whatever it might be, the data collection that might need to be done, etc. The more you emphasize that, the more they're involved. The more they're involved, the more valuable you are. Strange, isn't it? Can't explain it. Just try it though, it works a dream. It means you've got, if they even accept the homework, whether they do it or not, you have a partner versus servant relationship from day one. And this is the most tangible possible proof you could have for that. It, of course, gives you a reason for a second meeting. Now, second meetings are very important. In most B2B environments, it might be different with consumers. I don't do much B2C work. Most of the work that I do is B2B. It's very rare that a business-to-business transaction is closed in one meeting, if only because of this curse of consensus decision-making we talked about earlier, where there often are multiple people involved in every decision. So we nearly always need a second meeting. Therefore, the challenge is, how do you get from a first meeting to a second meeting? Different customers have measured their effectiveness around this. One organization in the UK, about 80 consultants, worked out that if they got to a second meeting, their close probability was 5 times higher. That's a heck of a lot higher, even assuming they might be a bit wrong about the calculation. They had a 5 times greater probability of closing if they got to the second meeting. So therefore, don't try and close in one meeting. Open, reframe, do steps 2, 3, 4, perhaps start the approach conversation and give them some homework and figure out a good reason why you have a second meeting with them. And that's your opportunity to get the right people, i.e. the real decision makers. Again, we'll talk more about that next webinar, how you figure out who they are. The second meeting gives you a far greater chance of closing and puts you head and shoulders above the servants who are just in a hurry trying to close the business. And all of that deepens your relationship with the client, which is already pretty good. It builds trust. It enhances your chances of success. So what might that homework be? Well, it could be some data you asked them to collect. It could be some consensus you want, but please stay involved in that. It could be you want to get some senior management input, ideally with you present. It could be some analysis to be done, perhaps even with you. You know, it depends on your field of activity as to what it might be. And if we had more time, we would have a very open discussion about what kind of things you might add. Just realized that scales are the wrong way around. We actually want to, that's the problem, that image. That's what we want to do is tip that scale. The entire purpose of this webinar is to tip that scale. So I'm going to leave you with some suggested actions. Starting from the end, what homework might you set your clients? I just saw James's question flash across my screen. Yes, the earlier steps on reframing are covered in the very next webinar, James, on negotiation. What approach do you stand for? We talked about campaign for choice of approach rather than just choice of you as a supplier. So what approach do you stand for? You know, what are you passionately against? Just as I'm passionately against discounting, what are you against? What are you for? why. That's a compelling narrative for you to build. If a client ignores your approach, what risks do they run? Have you a story to back that up? What's the consequences of ignoring your approach? This is a very compelling reason to buy you. Probably more compelling than your fees. If they run the risk of jeopardizing a 2 million account with a major supermarket, then really haggling over 2 grand of your project costs is a bit of a waste of time. And therefore, as a result of all that, working back to the first tip of today, which clients do you choose to work with? So you're building that narrative from the client back to you rather than from you away from the client, from you out to the client. And for that matter, as a result of all this, what should your fees be? That's a question I will, in a sense, need to get some input from you on. Now, I'm mindful of time, Claire. Should I share these slides before I forget? If I can remember how. I'm new to Demio. How do I share slides? I know it's here somewhere. Here we go. Go backstage. Yeah. I hopefully in a moment, as soon as I find them, here we are. Handouts. Share with attendees. I am hoping. Yes, I heard a little ping. I'm hoping that means that you just got yourself a set of slides. Somebody please tell me it is.
I can see them. If you guys want to type in that you can see the slides, that would be great.
Yay!
Great.
Thank you. You're welcome as part of the series. Then I'm offering a 30-minute coaching session. I'm just hoping everyone doesn't take it up, or I really will have a problem. But I would ask you to do some preparation. And I'm not just implementing my tip number 4, because that preparation involves not only a little bit of work that's going to help you, but the questions, by the way, are on the next page that will come up as soon as the webinar ends. One of those questions, as you'll see, is about day rates. I'm doing some research for the next call, the next webinar, I should say, which is on the 27th of February, about the range of day rates that are achievable. It's not the actual numbers that well, I would like to get the numbers from you, but what I'm most keen to get is the range. I'm trying to understand what the range that's achievable is. So there's a few questions on the next page that's going to help us prepare that. And there will also be a link in the email about that webinar series, the 3 that I've already alluded to. 12:48. Any parting questions or anything we need to cover, Claire, before we wrap up? I'm mindful of time.
We have a couple last questions, but well, I think this is a good one to end on. From Richard, how do you maintain the client's interest engagement after you leave the face-to-face meeting?
Great question. Really good question, Richard. Ideally, by scheduling the second one before we leave. That is the perfect answer. The homework helps with that. If we're doing a little bit of work, they're doing a little bit of work, and we have a scheduled second meeting to go to, then that's pretty good stuff. But it is important because there's always, managing the client's attention, and this attention deficit economy in which we're currently in is never without its risks. And I've considered those risks carefully, by the way, in choosing whether we should go for a second meeting or not. I always go for a second meeting. I find it's worth it. Sure, there is the risk that they'll go to somebody whom they can buy from on one meeting. I accept that risk, but far more often they don't. If there's a good reframe done, it usually displaces the competition. And secondly, it means that they're now, when we get around to the pricing conversation, we get to charge much higher fees precisely because we've already differentiated ourselves from other providers. I find it works time and time again, but of course, as the salesman said to the rookie, if you're afraid of risk, stay in the car. On that happy moment, that slightly trivial moment, I think we need to wrap up. hope to see you on the next webinar. If you want to have some one-to-one time, there's an email coming your way with some suggested prep for that. Please allow some flexibility on scheduling. It's a rather busy month. Thanks everyone for participating. Wish you a good afternoon.